Creating a methodology for sound design starts with understanding the acoustics of space. Understanding the technical effects spaces produce on activator sounds is vital to designing with accurate parameters. Also, understanding that the soundscape or design created as a composition is equally important. For every musical composition tells a story or narrative, and sound design follows this tradition. Each composition must at least have 4 elements in space to tell the story of that space designed. These are vocals, footsteps, physical environment or activators, and music. Each of these components introduces new information regarding the space. Vocals allow for an understanding of proximity, scale, and orientation. Footsteps address motion, spatial transitions, and what is happening around you. The activators and physical environment inform the listener on orientation, placement, a space's materiality, movement, and size. Finally, music and soundscapes, if done correctly, can elicit mood, program, and time. While all these elements are necessary for telling a story of space, how a designer manipulates these sounds will ultimately inform the character and quality of that space. While space is inherently mute without activators accompanying it, these elements give the space life and tell the narrative of the space. In order to capture the quality of space using these activators, I demonstrate the technical effects produced by a space. Given a space's materiality, size, and shape, one can manipulate the sound of an activator to mimic the effects a space would produce on it. These 3 elements determine the technical manipulation of sound in order to obtain the desired effect. By experimenting with dry or original input sounds, the reverberation of that sound, and the length of the sound or decay time, one can start to create their own spaces. However, basic rules of thumb apply to understanding certain spaces. For instance, smaller, more confined spaces have shorter decay times, higher dry sounds, and the materiality and shape of the room will determine the reverberation length. In contrast, larger spaces have less dry inputs, a higher reverberation length also depending on materiality, and longer decay times. I show this with a simple cell phone ring in 3 different spaces that were created through the manipulation of the 3 previously mentioned identifiers. For the first ring, I designed the space to be a small room with a distinctive dry sound with a very sharp, quick reverberation. The length of decay time is minimal, and the final result is a very personal small space. For the second pair of rings, I designed the space to mimic that of an empty reflective hall. This space was created with a softer dry noise than that of the first pair's ring and with a greater reverberation length. The length of decay for this ring is far greater than the first and exhibits a more reflective materiality present in the space. For the third ring, the sound adapts to longer reverberation and longer decay time, expressing the vast quality of the space. Being in the largest space presented, the ring exhibits the softest dry noise and a higher reverberation as compared to the second ring. While this begins to create different spaces, architecture, as we know, is not just about space, but how one transitions between the spaces. The key for designing in sound then comes down to how sound gets transitioned space to space. Accurately representing this allows for a cohesive understanding of spaces that builds towards the entire form of the architecture presented. I demonstrate the idea of movement in sound by placing you in a hallway where you are not alone. As you could hear, 2 people passed you, first on your left and then on your right. By manipulating the activator's sounds of footsteps, the space instantly took on an experience of movement. Again, understanding the technical effects played to the manipulation of these sounds in order to produce movement. By adjusting with the sound's pan or left and right balance or directionality, I was able to give the impression of a person starting in front of you and then moving towards your left and ultimately walking past you. I then exhibited the same strategy by applying it to the right, and increased the pace by adjusting how quick the pan transitioned from forward to side and finally to the back. I also used the volume of the sound to capture the positioning of the footsteps. By using volume, a designer can accurately transition activators, spaces, and a person's movement through a space. By combining these two processes of capturing a space's characteristics and capturing movement through a space, a designer can begin to compose a complete understanding of the space. I leave you with this space that I compose using this methodology. Don't get wet.